When people think about old Hollywood legends, one name almost always rises above the rest. John Wayne. To millions of fans, he was not just an actor. He was strength. He was courage. He was a tall figure riding across the desert with steady eyes and a deep voice that sounded like it could never break. For decades, he played soldiers, cowboys, and men who stood firm when the world fell apart around them. On screen, he rarely showed fear. He rarely hesitated. And he almost never lost. But real life is never as simple as a movie script. Behind the camera, behind the fame, and behind the carefully built image of the Duke, there was a complicated man with private struggles, broken relationships, deep regrets, and emotional wounds that never fully healed. When he died in 1979, the world mourned the loss of a legend. Yet what happened after his death shocked even those who thought they understood him. His will reveal decisions that felt personal, calculated, and even harsh. Instead of dividing his estate equally among his children, he created a formula based on age. The older you were, the more you received. The younger you were, the less you got. This meant that his youngest son, Ethan, who was still a teenager at the time, received far less than his older brothers and sisters. One son was given control over the powerful family company, Bat Jack Productions. His first wife, long divorced, was given steady financial support. His third wife, still legally married to him when he died, received nothing. There was even a legal clause written specifically to block one's son-in-law from ever touching an inheritance. These were not small technical decisions made by accountants. They felt intentional. They felt emotional. And for many observers, they felt like the final move of a man who wanted control even from beyond the grave. To understand why he made those choices, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to look at the boy who was not born John Wayne at all, but Marion Robert Morrison, a child who grew up teased for his name and who spent much of his early life trying to prove that he was tougher than the jokes thrown at him. That early need to build strength, to reshape how people saw him, and protect himself from embarrassment became that early need to build strength, to reshape how people saw him, and to protect himself from embarrassment became a pattern that followed John Wayne for the rest of his life. He was born Marion Robert Morrison in 1907 in Winterset, Iowa, a quiet town that could not have imagined it was raising a future movie icon. He was a large baby, strong and healthy, but his first name created a problem almost immediately. At that time, Marion was more commonly used for girls, and children can be cruel when something feels different. He was teased, and those small moments left marks. They may not sound important compared to the fame and money he later gained, but childhood shame often builds a foundation for adult behavior. As he grew older, his family moved to California because his father's health required warmer weather. The move brought change, struggle, and financial pressure. Money was tight, and young Marion learned quickly that pride does not fill an empty stomach. He worked small jobs, delivered newspapers, and helped however he could. Around this time, he began walking to school with his dog, an Airedale Terrier. A local fireman started calling the dog Big Duke and the boy Little Duke. The nickname stayed. Over time, people dropped a little and simply called him Duke. That name sounded strong. It sounded solid. It did not invite teasing. It felt like armor. Names matter, especially to someone who once felt embarrassed by his own. Years later, when Hollywood executives gave him the name John Wayne for the screen, it was another step in the same direction. He kept building a version of himself that felt stronger than the boy named Marion. In high school, he found confidence through sports. He grew tall, reaching about 6 feet 4 inches, and played football with determination. He was not described as the most talented player of his generation, but he had presence. He had drive. That drive earned him a football scholarship to the University of Southern California. For a time, it seemed his future might be in sports. But one accident changed everything. While body surfing at Newport Beach in 1926, he injured his shoulder badly. The injury cost him his scholarship. Without financial support, he could not continue school. In one moment, the path he had worked toward disappeared. For someone who already feared failure and embarrassment, this was another heavy blow. He did what he had learned to do as a child. He worked. He took a job at Fox Film Corporation, moving props and furniture. It was not glamorous. No one applauded him. but it placed him near movie sets, and slowly he began appearing in small roles. Director John Ford noticed him. Ford saw something that others did not. It was not polished training. It was presence. That presence would eventually change his life. But before it did, he endured years of low-budget Western films, slow progress, and constant uncertainty. That long struggle shaped the way he viewed loyalty, power, and opportunity. He never forgot how quickly success could disappear. He never forgot what it felt like to lose everything because of one bad moment. And that memory would later influence how tightly he held control over his career, his image, and eventually his estate. The slow climb from unknown actor to Hollywood star was not smooth, and it did not happen overnight. After years of small roles and low-budget westerns, the turning point finally came when director John Ford cast John Wayne as the Ringo Kid in the 1939 film Stagecoach. At the time, many studio executives doubted that Wayne could carry a major production. They saw him as a B-movie actor, someone who belonged in small theaters, not in large, serious films. But Ford believed in him. He fought for him. And when Wayne appears on screen in Stagecoach for the first time, standing in the open desert with the wind around him, it feels like a moment of arrival. The camera frames him as a hero, strong and steady. Audiences responded immediately. The film was a success, and almost overnight, John Wayne became a leading man. Yet success did not erase his insecurities. In fact, it may have deepened them. When a man spends years fearing failure, he often clings tightly to success when it finally arrives. Wayne built his image carefully after Stagecoach. He chose roles that supported the strong, silent, patriotic figure audiences loved. During World War II, he played brave soldiers on screen, even though he did not serve in combat himself. That decision followed him for the rest of his life. Critics accused him of avoiding military service, while others defended him by pointing out that he had a wife and 4 young children at the time and received a deferment. Still, the public debate created a shadow over his patriotic image. He became even more vocal about his love for America, perhaps trying to close that gap between perception and reality. At the same time, his personal life was becoming more complicated. He married his first wife, Josephine Saenz, in 1933, and they had 4 children together. On the surface, it looked like a stable family life. But fame brings temptation, and Wayne struggled with loyalty. Affairs and long periods away from home created tension that grew over time. The marriage eventually ended in divorce in 1945. He quickly remarried Esperanza Chada Bauer, but that relationship was stormy from the beginning. Alcohol, jealousy, and loud arguments filled their home. There were reports of frightening fights, including an incident in which Chada reportedly fired a gun during an argument. Whether exaggerated or not, the story reflected how unstable the marriage had become. They divorced in 1954 after years of conflict. Later that same day, Wayne married his 3rd wife, Pilar Palit, beginning another chapter filled with both affection and difficulty. These repeated patterns show something important. Wayne often rushed from one relationship to another. He seemed uncomfortable being alone. He also seemed determined to stay in control. When control slipped away, whether in marriage or public reputation, conflict followed. This pattern would become important later, when examining how he divided his estate. His life was not simply about money or fame. It was about control, pride, and emotional wounds that never fully healed. By the 1950s and 1960s, John Wayne was no longer just a successful actor. He had become a symbol. His voice, his walk, and even the way he stood with his hands on his hips were copied and remembered. Films like The Searchers and True Grit strengthened that image of the hard but honorable man who follows his own code. When he finally won the Academy Award for Best Actor for True Grit in 1970, it felt like Hollywood was officially recognizing what audiences had believed for years. He joked during his acceptance speech, saying that if he had known wearing an eye patch would win him an Oscar, he would have done it sooner. The room laughed, and the moment seemed light. But behind that smile was a man who had waited decades for that level of approval. He had made nearly 170 films, yet only 1 Oscar win came at the end of his career. For someone who cared deeply about respect, the long wait likely mattered more than he ever admitted. At the same time, his health was becoming a serious issue. In 1964, doctors removed his entire left lung after discovering cancer. It was a massive surgery, especially for a man who had built his image on strength. Yet he faced the illness publicly. He told the press about it and encouraged others to get medical checkups. For a while, he recovered and returned to work, but his body was no longer as strong as his screen characters. Years later, more health problems followed. In 1979, what was expected to be a routine gallbladder surgery turned into something far worse. Doctors discovered widespread cancer and removed his stomach and surrounding tissue. The operations were long and painful. He fought through them with determination, but the truth was becoming clear. His time was limited. During these later years, another controversy continued to follow him. In 1971, he gave an interview to Playboy magazine in which he made comments about race and sexuality that many people found deeply offensive. Decades later, when those quotes resurfaced, they sparked new debates about how to judge public figures from the past. Some defended him by saying he reflected the views of his generation. Others argued that harmful words remain harmful regardless of time. The debate showed how complicated his legacy had become. He was admired as a film legend, yet criticized for certain beliefs and statements. This mix of praise and controversy shaped how people viewed him near the end of his life. His third marriage to Pilar Paley also faced strain over the years. They had 3 children together, including Ethan, who was still a teenager when Wayne's health declined. Although Wayne and Pilar never officially divorced, they separated in the early 1970s. After the separation, he formed a close relationship with his secretary, Pat Stacy. She remained with him during his final years and was included in his will. This detail would later surprise many people and add fuel to questions about how he divided his estate. As his health worsened in early 1979, reports say that faith became more important to him. Surrounded by Catholic influences through his wives and children, he reportedly chose to be received into the Catholic Church shortly before his death. On June 11, 1979, he died at the age of 72. His funeral was private, honoring his request for a quiet farewell with family rather than a large public ceremony. But the quiet did not last long. Once the details of his will became public, headlines returned. The decisions he made about his fortune created shock, anger, and confusion. For a man who had spent his life controlling his image, his final act would once again place him at the center of controversy. When the will of John Wayne became public, the numbers alone were enough to capture attention. Court documents valued his estate at around $685 million, a massive amount of money for the time. But it was not just the size of the fortune that shocked people. It was the way he chose to divide it. Many expected a simple and equal split among his 7 children. That is a common path many parents take, especially when they want to avoid conflict. Instead, Wayne created a formula based on age. The older the child, the larger the share. The younger the child, the smaller the amount received. On paper, it may have looked logical to him. Perhaps he believed that older children had waited longer or had been part of his struggles during the early years. But emotionally, it did not feel equal. It did not feel gentle. It felt like a calculation. The decision affected his youngest son, Ethan, the most. Ethan was still a teenager when his father died. Compared to his adult siblings, his portion was much smaller. For outside observers, this seemed harsh. A teenager has more years ahead, more uncertainty, and less financial stability than older siblings who may already have careers and families. Some supporters argued that Wayne may have believed younger children would have more time to build their own success. Others believed it reflected deeper emotional differences within the family. Whatever the reason, resentment reportedly grew. Money does not just represent wealth. In families, it often represents love, approval, and recognition. When one child receives more, it can feel like a statement about worth. Another major part of the estate involved Bat Jack Productions, the company Wayne founded in 1952. Bat Jack owned valuable film rights and continued to generate income long after his death. Control of this company was placed in the hands of his eldest son, Michael. That decision gave Michael more than money. It gave him influence over his father's legacy. He became the gatekeeper of film rights, licensing agreements, and public image decisions. In a family already dealing with unequal financial shares, giving one child that level of power added another layer of tension. Leadership in a business can easily turn into control over family narratives and memories. Then there were the decisions involving his wives. His first wife, Josephine, whom he had divorced decades earlier, received a trust that paid her monthly income for life. Meanwhile, Pilar Pallied, his third wife and still legally married to him at the time of his death, received nothing directly from the estate. For many people reading the headlines, this seemed like a public rejection. Pilar had shared decades of his life and raised 3 of his children, yet she was excluded from direct inheritance. The decision felt deeply personal. Some believed Wayne may have already provided for her in other financial arrangements. Others believed it reflected the emotional distance that had grown between them after their separation. He also included money for his longtime secretary, Pat Stacy. Although they never married, she had remained close to him during his final years. Including her in the will added even more questions about loyalty and affection. Finally, there was a strict no-contest clause. This meant that any heir who challenged will risk losing everything. Such clauses are legal and not uncommon, but in this case, it felt like one final assertion control. Even in death, Wayne made sure that his wishes would not be easily questioned. For a man who had spent his life guarding his image and authority, the structure of his estate seemed to follow the same pattern. Ethan was still a teenager when his father died. Compared to his adult siblings, his portion was much smaller. For outside observers, this seemed harsh. A teenager has more years ahead, more uncertainty, and less financial stability than older siblings who may already have careers and families. Some supporters argued that Wayne may have believed younger children would have more time to build their own success. Others believed it reflected deeper emotional differences within the family. Whatever the reason, resentment reportedly grew. Money does not just represent wealth. In families, it often represents love, approval, and recognition. When one child receives more, it can feel like a statement about worth. Another major part of this estate involved Bat-Jack Productions, the company Wayne founded in 1952. Bat-Jack owned valuable film rights and continued to generate income long after his death. Control of this company was placed in the hands of his eldest son, Michael. That decision gave Michael more than money. It gave him influence over his father's legacy. He became the gatekeeper of film rights, licensing agreements, and public image decisions. In a family already dealing with unequal financial shares, giving one child that level of power added another layer of tension. Leadership in a business can easily turn into control over family narratives and memories. Then there were the decisions involving his wives. His first wife, Josephine, whom he had divorced decades earlier, received a trust that paid her monthly income for life. Meanwhile,